It started with a handshake that meant nothing, and a promise that meant everything. David Keller, a smooth-talking salesman with $1 million smile, always knew how to sell a dream. To his clients, to his friends, even to himself. But when his business partner Nina Lopez trusted him with her savings, the money she'd been setting aside to open a daycare for single mothers, he didn't just take her trust. He took her future. When she discovered the truth, David didn't apologize. He laughed. "Relax," he told her. "I'll pay you back when my next deal closes. You've got my word." But weeks turned into months, and the only thing growing faster than his excuses was his arrogance. When Nina finally dragged him to court, he strutted in wearing designer sunglasses and a smirk, calling her dramatic and ungrateful. Then came the moment that no one in that courtroom would ever forget. The experienced female judge, silver hair glinting beneath the courtroom lights, leaned forward and asked quietly, "Mr. Keller, is your word worth anything?" He scoffed. "Lady, my word is gold." Her gaze didn't waver. "Then I hope you're ready to find out what happens when gold turns out to be counterfeit." The smirk vanished. The room went still, because what came next wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. And by the time the gavel fell, David Keller would learn the most painful truth of all: promises can break bones, even without fists. The morning sunlight sliced through the tall windows of the downtown courthouse, drawing golden lines across the polished wood floor. Inside, people whispered in nervous tones, their words swallowed by the echoing expanse of justice. In the center of that echo sat David Keller, his elbows resting lazily on the table, exuding the kind of confidence that only money, or the illusion of it, could buy. He wasn't nervous. He didn't do nervous. To him, the courtroom wasn't a place of accountability. It was a stage. And David? He was the star. He adjusted his cufflinks, silver engraved with his initials, and leaned back, scanning the room like he owned it. Every flicker of movement, every anxious shuffle of papers was beneath him. In his mind, this was just another meeting, another obstacle he could talk his way out of. After all, he always did. Across the aisle sat Nina Lopez, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale. She looked smaller than she really was, weighed down by something heavier than fear, disappointment. Her curly hair was pulled back neatly, her face void of makeup, her eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to sue anyone. But David had given her no choice. It all began 6 months ago. Nina was a preschool teacher with a dream, one that had kept her up late at night, scribbling business ideas on yellow notepads and running numbers on coffee-stained spreadsheets. She wanted to open a daycare for single mothers. Not just a business, but a sanctuary. She'd saved every penny she could, taken on weekend tutoring jobs, and even sold her mother's old jewelry to reach her goal. Then she met David Keller. He was charming in that effortless, practiced way. They met at a local business networking event. He introduced himself as a consultant and investor who specialized in helping visionaries scale their dreams. His voice had a rhythm that made people believe. And Nina, idealistic and hopeful, wanted to believe more than anyone. When he told her he could help her secure a small business grant, she listened. When he said he'd match her $25,000 investment to speed up the process, she was hesitant, but hopeful. When he promised that, "You'll have your doors open in 6 months," tops, she shook his hand, and when he smiled and said, "You have my word," she believed him. That phrase, "you have my word," would come to haunt her. At first, everything seemed legitimate. David sent her mock-ups for logos, introduced her to potential investors, and even invited her to a lunch meeting with a supposed city official. Nina was impressed by his confidence, his connections, the way people seemed to defer to him. But soon little cracks began to appear. Receipts didn't match invoices. Investors missed meetings. Emails from the supposed city official bounced back. When she asked questions, he laughed it off. "Relax, Nina," he'd say, waving his hand. "That's how business works. Things take time." She wanted to trust him. She needed to trust him. Because the alternative, that she'd handed her entire savings to a con artist, was too painful to face. It wasn't until her rent check bounced that she realized the truth. The account she and David had set up for the daycare fund was empty. Not low, empty. When she confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He just sighed, sipping from a glass of scotch. "Nina, you're overreacting. The money's just tied up in a short-term investment. I'll pay you back, okay? I always do, her voice shook. You promised me, he smirked. Promises are just words, sweetheart. You'll get your money when my next deal closes. That was the night something broke inside her. Now, sitting in that courtroom months later, Nina's eyes followed David as he laughed quietly with his lawyer. He wasn't even pretending to take this seriously. He'd arrived 15 minutes late, wearing sunglasses indoors, muttering to the bailiff that he had more important things to do than babysit a pity party. The murmurs quieted when the bailiff stood. All rise. The court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Briggs presiding, and there she was, the experienced female judge, silver hair perfectly framed against her black robe, eyes sharp as steel. She didn't need to shout. Her presence alone demanded order. Be seated, she said simply, her tone even but firm. David slouched casually into his chair. The judge's gaze flicked to him immediately. Mr. Keller, she said, you're expected to stand until I sit. That's how this works in my courtroom. He blinked, unbothered. Right, sorry, Your Honor. It wasn't an apology. It was performance. The judge turned her attention to the case file. Case 4829B, Lopez versus Keller. Allegations of breach of contract and misappropriation of funds. Mr. Keller, I understand you filed no counterclaim? He shrugged. Didn't see the point. She's just bitter. The judge's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. Ms. Lopez, you may proceed. Nina's attorney, a calm man in his 40s, began his opening statement. He spoke softly but clearly, detailing the sequence of events, the handshake, the promise, the vanished funds. David rolled his eyes halfway through. When his turn came, his lawyer rose dramatically, adjusting his tie like an actor taking the stage. Your Honor, what we have here is a simple misunderstanding between two adults. My client, Mr. Keller, did not steal or deceive. He merely invested funds in a joint venture that did not yield immediate returns. Ms. Lopez was aware of the risks. This is business, not betrayal. The judge's gaze remained still. Is that your position, Mr. Keller? He smirked. Absolutely. I run real businesses. She just didn't understand the process. The judge tapped her pen against the desk once. We'll see who understands what before this is over. The morning wore on. Exhibits were presented, emails, contracts, bank statements. Nina's evidence was thorough, painfully so. Every dollar traced, every missing piece documented. When the judge looked over one particular bank statement, her brow furrowed. Mr. Keller, this transfer $10,000 was made from the joint account to a company under your name 2 days after Ms. Lopez deposited her funds. Can you explain that? He leaned forward, hands clasped. Sure, that's my consulting fee. I put in time. I deserve compensation. So, the judge said slowly, you paid yourself $10,000 without telling your partner, before the business even existed. He shrugged. That's how deals work, Your Honor. You wouldn't understand. It's called initiative. The courtroom went silent. Even his own lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge leaned back, her voice quiet but cutting. Oh, I understand quite well, Mr. Keller. What I don't understand is how arrogance like yours survives past childhood. At lunch recess, Nina sat alone outside the courthouse, clutching her coffee cup with trembling fingers. She'd thought seeing him humbled would make her feel better. It didn't. It just made her tired. Inside, David laughed with his lawyer, boasting loudly enough for her to hear. She's not gonna win. I've seen tougher judges fold under less. The lawyer didn't respond. He just sighed and rubbed his temples. When court resumed, the judge called both parties back. Mr. Keller, Ms. Lopez, I've reviewed the exhibits. Before we proceed, I want to clarify something. David leaned back again, confident. Go ahead. The judge looked directly at him. You told Ms. Lopez, and I quote, you have my word, correct? He nodded proudly. Yes, ma'am. My word's my bond, is that so? She asked. Her tone softened, almost curious. Then what does your word mean to you, Mr. Keller? He smirked, sensing a chance to grandstand. It means I'm a man who gets things done. People trust me. My word means something. The judge's next words cut through the air like a blade. Then why is everyone who's trusted you sitting in debt, disappointment, or court? His grin faltered. The silence that followed was suffocating. The judge looked down at the documents again, her voice firm. Promises, Mr. Keller, are currency. They can build empires or bankrupt souls. The problem is you've been spending promises you can't afford. Nina watched as the color drained from David's face. For the first time, he didn't have a ready answer. When the judge finally adjourned for the day, she said one last thing that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. "Tomorrow, we will discuss not what you said, Mr. Keller, but what you did. Because this court deals in actions, not ego." The gavel struck. David stood, muttering under his breath. "She doesn't scare me." But the way his hand trembled as he reached for his phone told another story entirely. Outside, as the crowd dispersed, Nina lingered by the courthouse steps. The city buzzed around her, indifferent and alive. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in months, she felt something close to hope. Somewhere deep inside her, she knew. Justice wasn't always fast, but it was patient. And patience was about to catch up with David Keller. The next morning, the courtroom air felt heavier, the kind of weight that hangs before a storm. Reporters were already whispering in the back row. Word had spread about the man who tried to charm his way through justice, only to face a judge who didn't flinch. David Keller walked in wearing the same designer suit, but this time his swagger had cracks. His sunglasses were gone, and his lawyer looked more nervous than usual. Even the way David tapped his fingers on the table felt forced, like a man rehearsing confidence he didn't feel. Across from him, Nina Lopez sat straighter than before. The first day had drained her, but it had also freed her. She wasn't afraid anymore. The truth was on paper, and for once, someone powerful was listening. The experienced female judge entered, and the room rose. She took her seat with the calm precision of someone who had seen every kind of lie, and knew how to dismantle them piece by piece. "Good morning," she began. "Let's continue where we left off." Nina's attorney stood first. "Your Honor, today we intend to show the defendant's consistent pattern of deceit, not just toward my client, but toward multiple business partners." David's lawyer immediately objected. "Irrelevant and prejudicial." The judge turned her gaze toward him. "If it establishes motive or intent, I'll decide what's irrelevant." Her tone didn't rise, but the authority in her voice silenced the room. Nina's lawyer proceeded. He handed the judge a stack of documents, business filings, email chains, text messages. Each one painted the same picture. David promising the world, collecting funds, and vanishing when accountability came knocking. The judge read silently for a moment before setting the papers down. "Mr. Keller," she said evenly, "how many ventures have you started in the last 3 years?" David smirked. 7, give or take. "And how many are still active?" He paused, eyes darting sideways. "A few. Some just didn't pan out." The judge's pen tapped once on her desk. "So, to clarify, you took people's money for 7 ventures and not one of them succeeded?" "Business has risks," he said defensively. "If they didn't understand that, that's not my fault." "Mr. Keller," she said, her voice calm but razor-sharp, "what you call risk, others might call exploitation." The lawyer for Nina played an audio recording next. The speakers crackled with David's voice, arrogant, dismissive, unmistakable. "Relax, Nina. I know what I'm doing. You'll get your cut once I close this other deal." "Don't be so dramatic. David, that's my money. You said it was going to the daycare, and it will. Just not right now. I've got to move funds around, make it work for both of us." "You should be thanking me for what?" "For letting you in on this in the first place." The courtroom went silent again. David's face tightened, his jaw clenching. Nina's eyes welled, but she didn't look away. She had replayed that recording 100 times in her head, each time wishing she'd said something stronger, something that would make him understand what he was taking from her. But now she didn't need to. The tape said it all. The judge finally broke the silence. "Mr. Keller, this recording, was this your voice?" He hesitated. "Yeah, but..." "No but," she interrupted. "Just yes or no?" "Yes. So you admit you diverted her funds and dismissed her concerns?" "I was managing them," he snapped. "It's called strategy." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "In my courtroom, Mr. Keller, strategy without honesty is called deception." He leaned forward, his frustration bubbling over. "With all due respect, Your Honor, you don't understand business. You sit up there judging people, but you've never built anything. You've never had to take a risk." The judge's expression didn't shift, not even a blink. But her next words carried the weight of thunder. "You're right," she said softly. "I've never conned someone out of their dreams and called it a business plan." The courtroom froze. Even David's lawyer didn't move. Nina's hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear this time. It was the release of months of anger finally meeting justice. The judge continued, her voice firm but steady. You walk into this courtroom as if the rules don't apply to you. You think charm can replace integrity? But here, Mr. Keller, words don't sell. Evidence does. And right now, your evidence says your word is worthless. The day stretched on with witness testimony. 2 former associates of David's took the stand, reluctantly at first, then with growing conviction. They described similar stories, glowing promises, sudden disappearances, and the same empty phrase, "You have my word." One man, an older mechanic named Tony, leaned toward the microphone and said, "He told me the same thing he told her. Said he'd double my investment. I never saw a dime." David laughed under his breath. "You can't trust a guy who can't manage his own shop." Tony glared at him. "Maybe, but at least I never lied to feed my ego." The judge raised her hand. "Enough. Mr. Keller, you'll remain silent while others testify. You've had your turn to talk. You used it poorly. Every eye in the room was now fixed on him." His smirk was gone. The performance was over. What remained was a man stripped of illusion. During recess, reporters swarmed the hallway asking Nina for comment. "Do you think justice will be served?" One shouted. She paused before answering. "I think justice already started the moment he had to face the truth." It wasn't vengeance in her tone, just exhaustion and the faint light of closure. Inside, David sat alone at his table. His lawyer leaned close, whispering, "You're making this worse." "Stop antagonizing the judge," David scoffed. "She's just another bureaucrat with an attitude." His lawyer's voice dropped. "That bureaucrat could decide whether you walk out of here with your reputation intact or as a public cautionary tale. Start listening." For once, David didn't have a comeback. When court resumed, the judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Keller, you've had 2 days to reflect. I'd like to give you the chance to speak plainly. No charm, no performance. Just truth. Did you or did you not misappropriate the plaintiff's funds for personal use?" David exhaled sharply. "I moved the money to another account temporarily. I was going to pay her back." "Temporarily," the judge repeated. "Meaning without her knowledge or consent?" He hesitated. "Yes, but no further clarification is needed." Her tone carried a quiet finality. "You keep calling it business, Mr. Keller, but business requires trust. And trust once broken doesn't repair with excuses." She turned to Nina. "Ms. Lopez, you may have believed his word was gold. But what we've learned today is that gold can tarnish. And what's left behind is far less valuable." Nina nodded silently, tears welling but not falling. As the day neared its end, the judge's patience thinned. "We will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. Mr. Keller, I suggest you spend the evening considering what honesty sounds like." David opened his mouth as if to reply, but the look in her eyes stopped him cold. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment. And somehow that felt worse. He left the courtroom under a swarm of flashing cameras, each one capturing his fall from arrogance to infamy. That night, in a downtown bar, David sat nursing a drink. Scrolling through his phone, his name was trending. Slick salesman exposed in court. Judge School's arrogant conman. He threw his phone down. "They don't know anything," he muttered. A voice from the next stool answered, "They know enough." It was Tony, the mechanic. He'd followed the story. He leaned back, eyes calm. "You had everyone fooled for a while, but you can't outrun the truth forever." David stared into his drink. For the first time, the words didn't bounce back with a quip. They just stuck. The next morning, Nina woke before sunrise. The city outside her window felt different, quieter somehow. She dressed slowly, her nerves steady but alert. Today wasn't just about the verdict. It was about closure. She arrived early, taking a seat by the window as light filtered in. And when David finally entered, his expression was no longer smug. It was defensive, brittle, human. As the judge entered and the courtroom rose, David exhaled heavily, his shoulders sinking slightly. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand that this wasn't a negotiation. It was accountability. And for the first time in his adult life, he wasn't in control. Tomorrow would bring judgment. But today was the last day he could lie to himself. The last day the world would mistake his arrogance for strength. And the last day his promises would mean nothing. The third day began differently. There was no laughter from David Keller. No snide remarks or exaggerated gestures. He sat silently, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. The mask of arrogance had cracked, and everyone in the courtroom could see the fear bleeding through. The air was electric. Even the reporters who had come hoping for more of David's infamous bravado now sat waiting in reverent silence. Something had shifted. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was reckoning. The experienced female judge entered, her robe flowing like calm authority made flesh. The gavel struck once, firm, final, unhurried. "Court is now in session," she said, her tone sharp enough to still every whisper. "We'll begin with closing statements." Nina's attorney rose first. His voice was steady, deliberate, not angry, but heavy with conviction. "Your Honor," he began, "this case was never about a business deal gone wrong. It was about trust, and what happens when a man treats trust as currency to be spent instead of honored. My client believed in Mr. Keller's promise. She gave him her savings, her time, and her belief that he would act with integrity. Instead, he turned that belief into profit, using her funds for personal gain while hiding behind excuses." He paused, letting his words sink in. In every message, in every lie, Mr. Keller weaponized charm. He thought that if he smiled while he stole, people wouldn't notice. But Ms. Lopez noticed. "And today, so does this court." The judge nodded once, then turned to David's attorney. "You're closing, Mr. Weller?" David's lawyer stood reluctantly. His tone was professional but thin, like a man trying to salvage a sinking ship. "Your Honor, while my client acknowledges certain financial missteps, there was no malicious intent. Mr. Keller has expressed regret for how his actions affected Ms. Lopez. He intended to return the money once his other investments matured." He hesitated, searching for the right phrasing. This is not the story of a criminal, but of an ambitious man whose risks did not pay off. "We ask the court to consider leniency." The judge's eyes lingered on him for a moment before shifting to David. "Would you like to make a statement, Mr. Keller?" David hesitated. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he stood. For once, his voice lacked the slick confidence that had once filled boardrooms and cocktail parties. "Your Honor, I never meant for any of this to happen the way it did." The judge tilted her head slightly. "Go on." "I thought I could make it work," he continued, words tumbling out like confession. "I thought if I just moved things around, invested smartly, I could pay her back and still come out ahead. I didn't see it as stealing. More like—" He stopped himself, realizing how hollow that sounded. The judge finished for him. "More like borrowing without permission?" David nodded. "Yes," she folded her hands, calm but firm. "That's not called borrowing, Mr. Keller. That's called taking." She leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "Do you understand what you took beyond the money?" He hesitated. "Her trust, I guess." "No," she said quietly. "You took her dignity. You made her feel foolish for believing in you. That's worse than theft. That's betrayal wrapped in politeness." David's throat tightened. The silence afterward was unbearable. The judge continued, her voice now carrying the weight of truth sharpened by experience. "I've seen men like you before. Smart, persuasive, convinced they're too clever to ever face consequences. You call manipulation strategy, deceit negotiation, and arrogance confidence. But in this courtroom, we call it what it is, fraud." The word landed like a thunderclap. David blinked hard, trying to hold his composure, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed him. Nina watched, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. She hadn't expected to feel pity, but seeing him stripped bare of all pretense stirred something complicated inside her. He looked smaller now, just a man, not the monster she'd built in her mind. The judge took a deep breath. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Lopez. The defendant, Mr. Keller, is hereby ordered to repay the full amount of $25,000, plus damages and interest, totaling $32,000. David's lawyer lowered his head. The courtroom murmured, reporters scribbling furiously, but the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she said, "Mr. Keller will be required to attend a financial ethics course as part of his probationary sentence. If you ever intend to call yourself a businessman again, you will learn what real responsibility looks like." David looked stunned. "Probation? For a civil case?" "This isn't just civil," she replied. "It's moral. And I believe rehabilitation means more than writing a check." The gavel struck once. Judgment entered. But she didn't stop there. She removed her glasses, setting them down with care. Her tone softened. Not sympathetic, but deeply human. "Mr. Keller, I want you to hear me clearly," she said. "You can rebuild your reputation. You can pay back every cent. But until you learn that words are a contract, not a costume, you will keep repeating this pattern. Integrity isn't a performance. It's what you do when no one's watching." Her gaze drifted briefly toward Nina. "And Ms. Lopez, don't let this define you. Some people use your faith in them as an opportunity to take. Others see it as proof you're capable of believing in something good. Don't stop believing. Just choose more wisely next time." Nina nodded through tears. "Thank you, Your Honor." David slumped into his seat, staring at his hands. For the first time in his life, no one was clapping. No one was admiring his charm. There was no audience left to impress. Only truth, and truth had no patience for showmen. The judge stood to leave but paused, her voice calm yet deliberate. "Mr. Keller, before I go, I want you to remember something my father told me when I was your age. When you talk too much, people stop listening. But when you act right, you never need to explain yourself. You've been talking your entire life. Maybe it's time to start listening." Then she left, her robe sweeping quietly across the floor as the gavel's echo faded into silence. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, microphones swarmed, and the wind carried snippets of conversation. "Do you regret what happened?" A reporter shouted at David. He ignored them, pulling his jacket tight as he pushed through the crowd. But the questions followed like gnats. "Did the judge's words change your mind? Will you apologize to Ms. Lopez?" He stopped for half a second, his jaw flexing, eyes flashing with something between pride and shame. Then he muttered, almost to himself, "You can't fix stupid questions," before disappearing into a waiting car. But even as the door slammed, her voice, calm, unwavering, echoed in his head. Integrity isn't a performance. He couldn't shake it. Nina, meanwhile, stood on the courthouse steps, her lawyer beside her. The reporters turned their cameras to her instead. "What will you do now that you've won?" one asked. She thought for a moment. "Winning isn't the right word," she said quietly. "Justice doesn't feel like winning. It just feels right." And with that, she walked away. No smile, no victory speech, just relief. That night, in a dim apartment overlooking the city, David sat alone at his desk. The verdict replayed in his mind, every word like a slow echo bouncing off concrete walls. He opened his laptop to find his inbox flooded. Clients backing out, partnerships dissolving, investors ghosting him. His empire, built on charisma and charm, was crumbling in real time. He rubbed his temples, muttering, "This can't be happening." But deep down, he knew. It wasn't happening to him. It was happening because of him. On his desk sat a small, tarnished gold watch, one he'd once bragged about buying after closing the biggest deal of his life. Now, its ticking felt loud, accusatory. He stared at it, remembering the judge's words about gold turning counterfeit. And for the first time in his life, David Keller truly understood what that meant. The judgment wasn't just a legal sentence. It was a mirror. And in that mirror, he saw the man he had become. Not the visionary he pretended to be, but the coward who hid behind empty promises. The truth was merciless. But it was also cleansing. When the gavel fell for the final time, it didn't just mark the end of a case, it marked the end of an illusion. For David Keller, life after judgment didn't feel like punishment. Not at first. It felt like silence. A silence that followed him everywhere. Into his apartment, his inbox, his phone. The endless buzz of deals, messages, and opportunities was gone. The noise he once called success had vanished, and in its place was something new, something that felt foreign and unwelcome. Accountability. 2 weeks after the verdict, David woke up to another rejection email. The client who'd once begged for his expertise now refused to even take his calls. He tossed the phone onto the couch and rubbed his eyes. "They act like I killed someone," he muttered. Then, in the quiet, he heard the words that had haunted him since court. Integrity isn't a performance. It's what you do when no one's watching. No one was watching now. And for the first time, he had no idea what to do. He glanced across the room at a stack of unopened envelopes from the court and from Nina's attorney. restitution schedules, payment reminders, probation instructions. The kind of paperwork that reminded him that charm couldn't erase debt. He poured himself a drink, then stopped mid-motion. His hand trembled. The liquor, amber and inviting, reflected something he didn't want to see. His own face, tired, beaten, still pretending to be in control. He set the glass down and walked away. Meanwhile, Nina Lopez's life was finally moving forward. Not easily, but steadily. The refund wasn't everything. The daycare dream had been delayed, not destroyed. She'd gone back to teaching full-time. Saving again, starting smaller this time, one step at a time instead of all at once. When people asked how she felt about the verdict, she'd answer simply, relieved. But relief is a quiet victory. It doesn't come with applause or headlines. It comes at night when you can finally close your eyes and not replay the betrayal over and over again. Still, sometimes she'd see David's face in her mind, that flash of disbelief when the judge told him the truth he'd spent years avoiding. It wasn't joy she felt remembering it. It was clarity. He had been her mistake, yes, but he had also been her lesson. 3 months passed. David started attending the court-mandated financial ethics program, a weekly evening class held in the Community Justice Center downtown. At first, he sat in the back, arms crossed, rolling his eyes as others shared their stories, ex-investors, accountants, small business owners who'd cut corners and paid the price. He thought they were fools. Until one night, an older man in a wrinkled suit stood up and said something that hit him harder than he expected. "I didn't lose money," the man said. "I lost trust. And once people stop believing in you, you might as well be invisible." Invisible. That word stayed with David long after class ended, because that's exactly what he'd become, a ghost in his own life. One evening, as part of the program, the instructor assigned community service hours. David was placed at SAI, a local daycare, to help with maintenance work, repainting walls, fixing broken shelves, cleaning play areas. When he arrived, he froze. The sign above the door read, "Sunrise Steps Early Learning Center." He felt his chest tighten. He'd heard that name before. Nina's old business proposal. He stepped inside, hesitant, guilt sitting heavy in his gut. The owner, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, greeted him warmly. "You must be the volunteer from the court. We're short-staffed, so I'm grateful." He nodded silently and got to work. Hours passed as he painted walls in soft pastel colors, the same ones he remembered from Nina's sketches. He found himself staring at the design, hand-drawn suns and clouds across the nursery walls. It looked familiar. When he asked where the idea came from, the woman smiled. "A young teacher shared this concept with me a while ago," said she. "Didn't have the means to open her own center, so she wanted others to use her idea freely. He didn't have to ask her name. He already knew." That night, David sat in his car outside the daycare long after closing. For the first time, there was no deflection, no denial, just the raw, cold sting of self-awareness. He had destroyed someone's dream. And she had turned that destruction into something beautiful anyway. That realization didn't crush him. It humbled him. Weeks turned into months. And slowly, the shape of his life began to change. He sold his luxury car, downsized his apartment, and started doing honest consulting work again, this time for small businesses, pro bono. The first few clients didn't trust him. He couldn't blame them. But he kept showing up, quietly, consistently. No sales pitch, no arrogance, just work. And with each person he helped, something inside him softened, not pride, but something deeper. A kind of peace that didn't need an audience. Then, one cold autumn morning, he received an envelope in the mail. The handwriting was neat, familiar. It was from Nina Lopez. Inside was a check, not for money, but for closure. "David, I heard from the daycare that you volunteered. I don't know if you meant to end up there, but I'm glad you did. I've been able to move forward. You should too. Not everything broken stays that way." He stared at the letter for a long time. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close. Something even more powerful. Acceptance. Months later, the judge, the same experienced female judge who had presided over the case, sat in her chambers reviewing her docket. Dozens of new cases waited for her: theft, fraud, family disputes. The never-ending cycle of human error. Her clerk entered quietly. "Judge Briggs, you've got a letter here. From a former defendant." She raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual. Let's see it." The clerk handed it over, and she unfolded it carefully. "Your Honor, you once told me integrity isn't a performance. I didn't understand that then. I think I do now. I've paid my dues, but more importantly, I've changed how I live. I'm not writing this for leniency. I already got more grace than I deserved. I just wanted to say thank you. D. Keller." The judge smiled faintly. "Every once in a while," she murmured, "one of them listens." A few weeks later, fate, or perhaps justice, brought their paths together one last time. It was at a local charity fundraiser for early education programs. Nina was there, helping organize the event. The judge was the keynote speaker, and David, nervously, humbly, had donated printing services for the fundraiser materials. When Nina spotted him across the room, he froze, but she didn't glare, didn't look away. Instead, she walked over slowly. "Hi," she said softly. He swallowed. "Hi, Nina. I didn't know you'd be here." "Small city." She smiled faintly. "I heard about your letter to the judge." He looked embarrassed. "I wasn't trying to—" "I know," she said, interrupting gently. "That's why it mattered." For a moment, they just stood there. No bitterness, no apologies rehearsed, just quiet recognition of two people who had survived the same storm in different ways. The judge passed by just then, giving them both a nod, a silent acknowledgement that the courtroom's lessons didn't end with a verdict. They lived on in moments like this. Later that night, after the event, David walked home alone under the city lights. He didn't feel rich, he didn't feel powerful, but he felt real, something he hadn't felt in years. He thought about that. First day in court, about the arrogance that had blinded him, about the look on Nina's face when the truth finally came out. And for the first time, instead of running from those memories, he faced them, because now they weren't his shame. They were his proof that people can change when they stop talking long enough to listen. Some stories end with revenge, some with regret. But this one ended with truth. And in Judge Briggs's courtroom, truth was the only thing that ever really mattered, as she once said, and as every gavel strike reminded them all. Justice isn't about who wins. It's about who finally learns.